Hi, everybody. I'm Danina Garrett, the creator and founder of the An Intimate Conversation with Women of Color podcast, which is sponsored by Deneen Consults. This podcast was created to provide women of color a platform to use our voices. So thank you so much for stopping by and enjoy today's episode. Welcome to another episode of An Intimate Conversation with Women of Color. I am your host, Deneen L. Garrett, and it's been a minute, so thank you all for staying in and listening to or watching some throwbacks, which I have shared on Thursdays. Please make sure that you are subscribed to YouTube and or your favorite podcast platform. I am excited for today's guest. Today's guest is a woman that I've known for several years. We were colleagues, and she was very instrumental in something that I was doing before I retired. She helped me. She was our keynote speaker. She wrote a fabulous book, which we'll kind of talk about. And no thank you. Ways to set boundaries and just other things to do, whether it's in corporate, which is primarily what the focus was, or just in your life. The 7 steps that she shared with us, that she wrote about, would apply in all aspects. So we'll talk a little bit more about that, but I'm just so excited to have her. L. Michelle Smith is the CEO and founder of No Silos Communications, LLC. She is an ICF certified executive and personal coach, and so much more. El Michelle, what do you want the audience to know about you?
You know what? I want the audience to know that I am probably more like them than they know. We probably have a lot in common. I assume that a lot of your listeners are primarily women, and there may be some women of color that listen to just by the nature of your subject matter. But the fact that many of them are like you in that they spend or spent a lot of time in corporate America, I've done that too. And for those who have also been or strive to be entrepreneurs, I've been there twice over. So I think that's the main thing I want people to know about me outside of what I do, because I think that lends context to what it is that I do.
Yeah, absolutely. And you know what? So one thing about the guests or the audience rather, my number one outside of the US, they're located in Germany.
Okay.
My number one international listeners are in Germany. Number two is Slovakia. So, and so I want to shout them out definitely. So greatly appreciate them for tapping in. So you started No Silos Communication LLC to develop high-performing executive leaders with a specialty in women and women of color. What was the defining moment that led to this?
Actually, No Silos was launched while I was still in corporate America, and it was to support my podcast, the Culture Soup podcast. And at the time, I was really interested in telling business and leadership and technology and culture stories weekly to an audience that grew from, gosh, I guess 0 to almost 70 countries. Well, more than 70 countries. 300 episodes later, I did add on to the business. So there are all sorts of aspects to the business. And typically people know this business by the coaching, and that is NSC coaching, where NSC stands for No Silos Communications. But there's also consulting, and there's also speaking, and there's an imprint. So we do a lot of writing as well. But yeah, so the defining moment for me for even beginning the business was to have some structure around what I wanted to do with the podcast. And the podcast was imagined and conceptualized with the idea, knowing that I would be writing books within the next year or so to broaden my reach and my footprint. So there was that. The other piece of it was I was writing at the time for Black Enterprise. I was one of their main guest contributors. And I did a lot of topical articles around leadership and career. And the primary reason for that was that I was getting asked to speak more and more on these topics. And as part of what would result in a content strategy, it was important for me to kind of save time instead of writing on new topics or speaking on new topics. Whatever I spoke on, I wrote about.
Right.
And before long, I had a ton of content. And I knew it was almost go time to start to piece together a book.
Awesome. And the book, I absolutely love the book. And I remember when it was first brought to me when I started the role, I was like, oh my God, I have to figure a way to weave this in, right? We figure out a way to weave it into the curriculum. We had to do something around it. So for you to say yes to being a keynote speaker and kind of like bringing everything to home for the women, because they were asked to read the book before you did the keynote, so that they can come, really fired up, ask questions, and that they were so thrilled to have you. And again, I so appreciate you for that. So we were talking a little bit beforehand, and a book, several books you've written, co-authored, and one you just celebrated a 1 year. And what book was that? And actually, who's the main author?
Right. That is not my book. I want to make that abundantly clear. I did not write it. It was written by my daughter, Joni Smith. She, at the time, was 8 years old. And it was on the cusp of the release of the first edition of No Thanks, 7 Ways to Say, I'll Just Include Myself, which is the one that you just referenced just then with that Women of Color program that I was so graciously asked to speak to. But Joni was in homeschool, remote school during the pandemic. And I was busy doing the business from my home office, home studio, but then also putting finishing touches on my own book. And while I was going through the editing process, she was becoming pretty aware of some of the subject matter and what was in the book. And one day, when she was supposed to be upstairs working on her math class, she made her way downstairs into my studio and said, "Hey, one day." And I said, "Cool." And I'm thinking, one day, maybe you will. And she
Right.
said, "No, I kind of want to do it right now."
Right.
And I just stopped in my tracks and I said, "Really?" And she said, "Well, maybe it could be something like Little No Thanks or No Thanks for Girls." And that's when it hit me. I was like, you know what? I'm going to give her some guidance and I'm going to send her on her way, because in third grade, you usually begin to learn composition. And she was writing little stories in school. So I told her to get with her grandmother, who's a retired English teacher, and write 7 stories for mommy. Again, built on the same chassis as my book, 7 Ways to Say, which, if you've read the book, if you haven't, you'll know that those are 7 affirmations. And the book is based in applied positive psychology. So she had 7 stories where she was telling how either she was left out, she was bullied, she didn't feel pretty enough, whatever it might be. Tell mommy in the story how it felt to be in that situation, describe the situation, and what she did to feel better about herself. And that would either be that she called on the teacher, or she tapped into her auntie or her mom or someone, and she was able to make it through. And each one of these vignettes has an affirmation with it. And at the end of every vignette, there is a question that parents and kids can discuss. So while it is No Thanks for Girls, and you meet Sophie, little boys are loving the book too.
That's
And it's
awesome.
highly illustrated. I hired a children's illustrator and a children's editor to make it just right for publication. And No Thanks for Girls is out there. No Thanks for Girls, 7 Ways to Say I'm Beautiful, Strong, and Enough.
Love it. Love it. And again, congratulations on the 1 year to Joni.
Yes.
The author. Yay. And you know what I love
Yay.
about it is you were leading by example, right? And she saw it. And that's what, as
Right.
parents, we want for our children. We want to plant those seeds and see them and water them and see them grow. And you were able to see that sooner than you expected to, right? Because again,
Right.
one day you're thinking down the line, and she's like, no, 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 one day, today, tomorrow, now.
Yes. And she inspired me, because if you pick up the second edition of No Thanks, 7 Ways to Say I'll Just Include Myself, the remix, you'll find that in those 2 bonus chapters, towards the end, I start to introduce a narrative around how we need to support our girls
Mhm.
from a young age so that they can have these mindsets already. Because a lot of this thinking that we have to undo, it starts when we're small.
Right.
And it comes from all sorts of places. Some of them you may think unlikely places. Because I am a student of culture, I look at all the cultures and all the micro cultures. And the point is that not only your family, which is a culture,
Mhm.
generational implications, that's cultural. Your faith or your religion can be a lot of your culture. And besides your race, all of that kind of comes together to create the way you view the world. And a lot of that happens when we're young.
Yeah.
So we can start to build that up in our girls, and we start to see that thread unfurl in the remix, which actually came out in May of 2021, um, right before Joni's debuted in August of 2021.
That's awesome. And that kind of segues into next.
Mhm.
We just talked about how, we do need to pour into our girls now. And you're absolutely right, because we know that at a young age, they start forming, who they want to be, who they think
Mhm.
they should be. And then we have environments and influences. And so why not us tap into now and, to help to guide them positively, so that they're not later in life having to say, or I mean, still doing it, but not having to say no thanks for the same reasons that we've had to say no thanks.
Right,
Right.
right. It's interesting because if I look back, and I do a lot of that in the book about where it came from inside of me to drum up the strength to say no thanks in whatever situation it might have been, or that I'm just going to include myself. It did come down to some of the things my parents taught me and some of the things that I learned in my faith walk. And I specifically call out Philippians 4:13. And knowing that that was my favorite scripture from being 4 years old. But when you understand that that says, I can do all things,
Yes.
you know, and I was thinking that when I was 4, it helps to have that foundation by the time you're in your 30s and 40s and dealing with some really serious things.
Absolutely, absolutely. So, what I want to ask about is, what are some of the things that you are doing to help women of color to find their voices? So, there's some Black and other women of color who haven't tapped into the power of their voice,
Mhm.
and tapped into their power in general or their voice. What 3 actions will help them to do both?
Well, first of all, you've got to understand who you are. And I say that not lightly, because many of us will say, well, yeah, I know exactly who I am. And then you start spouting off your resume,
Right?
your name, your
What do
last
you
name, your
do?
family, your people, all these people. But no, it's a little tougher work than that. This is actually going back into your past, unraveling some of these things. Like, you know what? That is a key moment in time for me when I learned that scripture. These are intentional steps that many of us don't take, not because we don't want to, it's because we are so caught up in the grind of life
Mhm.
that we don't carve out the time to think about who we are, good, bad, and ugly. Okay. Many of us also take cues from social media where you see this highlights reel. And so, as you're mapping out your most significant moments, and by the way, that's a real exercise that I give to my clients, and I adopted it from Trudy Bourgeois, who's one of my mentor coaches, where you map out those significant moments. I've had clients that will try to plot all of their moments on top of the line, and on top of the line, that's all the good stuff. I have to stop and say, are you meaning to tell me that nothing bad has happened to you? Now, there are
Oh,
two things that happen with this. Some of us are so bent on being positive about everything that we forget that it's those negative situations that really build our character, that really build our learning and our outlook and how we approach things. Most of the learning happens during those downtimes.
mm,
So we totally should embrace them. The failures, the missteps, the boo boos, all of it, the stuff where you were just very embarrassed. I guarantee you that's where you have learned a lot about yourself and how to move you forward. I say that they're keys to your future and your past.
absolutely.
And that sounds earthy crunchy, but at the end of the day, it's so true. Some of the passions and the superpowers that you're going to reveal about yourself, which actually lead to your purpose, are
Absolutely.
those things that were happening to you in your formative years. So, one, you got to know yourself and you've got to be willing to do the work.
Mhm.
Next is to understand your value. And you can't understand your value unless you've done that first work to know yourself. Okay. Understanding your value is so key. I was just on the line with a fortune writer, not a fortune teller, an editor from Fortune. And we were talking about how your narrative unfolds and reveals itself. And when you have those defining moments in life where you have other folks who have told you what you should be doing.
Right.
And all of that is not from a bad place. In fact, a lot of it's from a good place. Our parents spend a lot of time doing that in our lives to shape and mold who we are. But at some point, we have to stand on our own 2 feet and understand who we are as individuals and what value or what positive things that we can contribute to society. Our one thing is what I like to call it. In marketing, I spent 26 plus odd years in marketing. And when they're building these brands, they look for those assets that they already have and they build around that to create a brand, which ultimately is an experience. Okay. When you're thinking about people, even when you're thinking about Nordstrom's or Starbucks, it's an experience that they build for you. Okay. Now, the experience that you build and the talents that you bring, all of that stuff, that's the value, that one thing, the one problem that you solve. And many of us don't know what that is. We don't know what it is. I challenge anyone who's listening today to start to think about it. What is that one thing that I bring to society? And I'm not just talking about your job.
Right.
Because the mistake is that we find our identities in our jobs. And when that job is gone, we don't know what to do with ourselves.
Lost.
Lost. Completely lost. And I got to tell you, Deneen, I was surplus. And I wasn't the only one surplus. There were almost classes of people, like year over year that were getting terminated, laid off, whatever you want to call it. And, it's kind of a ritual on LinkedIn. You leave the company, and especially at AT&T, I don't really see any other companies do this.
I know,
You
right?
put your badge, right? You take the picture of the badge, however you're leaving, right?
Right.
Take the picture of the badge and you write some, farewell something, right? During that time, I saw more people posting their badges. It wasn't shocking to me because the business was changing. But what really just grabbed my soul and just twisted my heartstrings was seeing that there were people who just did not know what they were going to do with themselves, and they were crushed.
Yes.
And the fact that they were feeling this way and wanting to reveal it on social media let you know that it was really hurting inside, probably more than we ever knew.
Right.
And all I could think was, you gave 20, 30, something odd years to this Fortune 10 company. They saw your value, but you don't. And that's when I was like, you know what? So many people, not just women of color, everybody needs to understand where their intrinsic value comes from and what it even is. So that when these life challenges come your way, you're sitting in the mess, you're sitting in the brokenness, and you can find the message because you know your value and you can push forward. So, one, know yourself. Two, know your value. And then begin to plot your own course and be your own best advocate. Because we rely on so many other people to be that. And how many times have we been let down? They're never there when we need them, exactly, or that sponsor. In fact, in the new book, I talk about sponsorship impotency. We always talk about the need for a sponsor,
Right.
but once we get them, are they on the job? And what we find out is some sponsors aren't worth the salt they say they are.
Oops.
for all sorts of reasons.
Right.
Whether they just, the timing's wrong and they weren't able to execute, or they're just blowing smoke, because at some point you have to realize, if you know your value, there is something to them leveraging your name in circles as well as yours you're leveraging theirs. And a
Absolutely.
lot of us don't realize that sometimes. It's a reciprocal thing. Sometimes people just write big checks with their mouth that their behinds can't cash.
Right?
And
Yeah.
they're human, just like everybody else, and we
But-
can't put them on these pedestals. But we see this primarily with sponsors of color that are of rank. And what we forget is that they are typically still fighting
Mhm.
their own battle in those closer closed up spaces where we haven't been, the corporate jet and the big rooms, where there are officers and all these other folks. They're fighting to be centered for themselves. So it becomes very difficult to fight for them and for you too.
Right.
So
Absolutely.
we've got to be able to say, yes, I am blessed to have this sponsor, but what am I going to do for myself despite what they say what they're going to do for me? So that when it doesn't pan out the way they said, your world doesn't fall apart.
Mhm.
So
Absolutely.
we've got to know ourselves, know our value, and then advocate for ourselves.
And I want to touch on the value piece for a moment. So, I retired and I really planned to be retired. But several people were like, no, you still have so much to give. Why don't you this? Why don't you that? And so I embraced the coaching piece. And so for me, it's about helping people, empowering people to live a dream lifestyle. And part of that was doing it now, right? Not when you get retirement age. Like I'm not retirement age, but I was blessed to be able to retire early. But some people wait until they are retirement age. And so there's so much in like you said, putting all of their self into that job until that particular time, and then not knowing what to do, not knowing who they are besides that. But I remember being on a call, and this person mentioned he had 30 something years with the company, and he was asking, well, what do I need to do for the company? What, those type of questions he was asking. And I was really sad for him because I'm thinking, no, what can a company do for you?
Yeah.
how
Yeah.
how can a company help you to reach the goals that you're trying to reach or live?
Well, and that's misplaced values again. We put
Right.
all the stock in the big logo, the multi-billion-dollar conglomerate, and we espouse very little value to ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
So he had shifted that, and he's thinking, what do I need to do for them, when that's not even the question. And really, and you're learning this as you're continuing your coaching journey. These Knowing how to ask the right question is really the important piece,
Absolutely.
not knowing the answers. We don't know all the answers, and we shouldn't be um, trying to know all the answers. The good and the most strategic and the most powerful answers come when you really, really think about what it is that, if you have a great question, that question is going to uncover so much more than it would if you just had a pat answer.
Absolutely.
And sounds like that poor guy. I hope that he got some coaching. Bless him.
Yeah, I don't know, and that was just one example, but I, could share other examples, which, I know, and you continue to hear. But yeah, so absolutely, one, know yourself, two, your value, and three, you have to advocate for yourself. And social media allows us to do that. So it's, learn to do it and do it well. So I want to pivot.
Ooh, can I stop for a second to talk about social media? Especially, coming from a background where social media is, I mean, it was one of our weapons in our arsenal to communicate in the market. Um, Sometimes I just want to tell folks, just slow the roll. One, because again, the social media platforms really are an amplifier. And so it's very, very important that when the rubber meets the road, that people are able to vouch for the experience you're trumpeting on social media. I'd much rather see my clients build the experience offline and see what that gets them long before they start to amplify it. And the problem is that we don't really get clear on that one thing that we do to solve a problem for whoever it is that we do it for. We're not even clear on our audience. Who are we serving before we're out trumpeting on social media? And what you end up doing is painting this picture of something that you may or may not be able to deliver on.
Right.
And I had a client once say, who was a VP at a Fortune 10, not the one that we've been talking about. And she had made it through the ranks. She had a great reputation, a wonderful brand. And she said she was ready to get her brand in order. And I was like, tell me more about that. She said, well, I'm going on this vacation and I got my light loop and I got my camera. She had bought all this equipment and she was going to take pictures of herself, Instagrammable, on the beach. And I said, okay, what is this going to do for your brand?
Mm.
She said, well, I see other people doing it. You know, there's this girl and this sister is doing it. And she's over at this company and she's got a whole following of people. And I explained to her, I said, but you have a solid brand right now. And I just unpacked everything that she had done and how people respect her. And I said, and so what's a shot of you on the beach going to do for you? And she said, oh, you know, that's a really good question. Let me think about that. And essentially she put the light loop down.
Yeah.
Because we see these trends,
yeah,
you know, and we decide this is what I need to do to build my brand, to build my business. You know, some of the most effective businesses pick up the phone and they email people and they network in person or even on Zoom, and you will never see them hide nor hair on social media. And we're talking 7-figure businesses. So do with that what you will.
No, and you know what, though, that's great. And it's very powerful, because what you have to think about with the social media is it has to be in alignment. What is it? What's the message or the story you want to tell? And so, like, you know, the point that you're making with her, she's focused on XYZ and the beach doesn't fit in that. So what is the point of that? And you have to think about that. When you post this thing, what does that have to do with the message that you want to communicate or what you want people to know?
Perfect. And you know, some folks don't even understand why they're on social, even doing it in the first place.
Right?
They're doing it because they saw someone else do it, which, let's get back to the basics again.
Yeah. Know yourself.
Know yourself and understand your purpose. And if that purpose is that I know that the people I'm trying to reach are definitely on this platform, and this is a great way to get to them, then by all means do it. But then ask yourself, what do they need to hear in order to change the behavior in the way that I need them to even embrace this message and do whatever action? We haven't thought about that. We haven't thought about who it is. We haven't thought about what we want them to do as the result of hearing it.
Right.
We haven't thought through all of that. We just got a light loop and we're going for it.
Go on for it.
And what a big waste of time, because most people do not have a huge following. And that stuff takes time. It takes time to build and curate the audience that you really, really want. And what ends up happening, it's not sustainable, because it's taking a whole lot of work. And you're up there just styling and profiling and taking pictures and going live and do all of this stuff. And you're getting 1 or 2 likes and you're getting really exhausted.
Yeah. And it's confusing, right? It's absolutely confusing, because the example that you gave, that would be confusing for her audience. Like, wait a minute, I thought she was this, but.
Well, and you know what I submit? There are plenty of sisters that be like, oh, girl, that was slamming. That was
Right?
firework. You can get all of those responses. But what does it add up to? If she's trying to move the needle, let's say on a business that she started, she's trying to get clients. Is she getting clients because they said that was fire?
Right.
I mean, people laugh at me because there was at some point, 2016, I exited Facebook. I was still at the company. I exited Facebook for a number of different reasons. But one of them was I wanted to separate and gate the people that I needed to be in my core audience, who would need to act in a way that I needed them to, and also would appreciate the information that I was giving. And when I really did the work to figure out who that was, family wasn't a part of that.
Mm.
And so what I did was, you could really see it on Instagram, but I told the folks on Facebook that I was disappearing. And I did. I took all my data, pew, gone. But you can find me on Instagram. If you would like to learn more about what I'm doing with my job, if you love seeing content around my speaking, if you want to know more about the podcast, this is for you.
Yeah.
But if you're looking for other kind of content, this isn't it. Because even family can be on your side, yay, yay, woo, woo. And the other rest of them like, why is she doing that?
Right.
What's she doing that for? Who she thinks she is, you know?
Absolutely.
And you really want to weed these folks out because ultimately the folks that you want following you are the people who want your information and will act on your information.
Yes.
So I took my Instagram public because it was private. And I told the people who were on my private Instagram, because I actually opened a second one. And I told them, we're moving over here. This is the kind of content that's going to be here. If you don't like seeing this content,
don't come.
fine. You are welcome to follow if you want to. But if people don't come that I've known since the third grade, really, that wasn't even the point. But you have to be certain of why you're doing what you're doing before you can even make a call like that.
Plan and be intentional about it, all of that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, no, that's great information. There's a woman who, so she has women of color podcasters, and so a whole business. And I've seen her shift, right? She had a Facebook group, and she totally, thousands of people, and she totally moved to something else and was okay because this is what I'm doing now, and so I want the people who want this to come with me. And so yeah, sometimes you have to do that, and you have to be okay with it. So yeah.
Well, and in business too, I think this is one of the things because one of the trends that we're seeing, and I address this in my book, is the extrapreneurship, right? So you've got the 9 to 5, and then you're doing something outside of work. One of the things that throws people is that perhaps they think that if they start one thing, that it must work. And if it does not work, I'm throwing in the towel.
Yeah.
When I go back to these big multi-billion-dollar conglomerates that hire armies and armies and armies of people to think about their brand each and every day and every second of that day. And not just think about it, but change it. So let's look at product marketing for a second. In fact, let's look at tech. These folks have become brilliant at doing this. How many iPhones are we at now? 14?
Oh my God, 14 something.
14? Something like that? Okay. All right. They went to market with the first iPhone knowing it was not perfect. Think about that. They knew it was not perfect. They'd even done beta testing. I'm sure they had. They knew it was buggy when they put it out there. Guess what? They came back with iPhone 2.
Right.
And it's because they understood this is a fail fast, fail forward model. You take the information that you gather and you pivot based on what you know about that product that wasn't perfect. And guess what? You make money on it every time. So your friend, whoever that is that has the group for podcasters, that might have been one of her pivots. Let me gather them first. And while I'm doing this, I'm going to go look for another platform that might fit me a little bit better.
Yep.
But she didn't give up on that.
Oh God, no.
She was actually there for, however long it took to get the 1,000 people there. But it's okay. It's this reiteration. If it doesn't work, let's do something else.
Right.
And it's not spaghetti at the wall. It really is knowing what outcome you want and then trying the tactics and the strategies that could get you there. And you learn every time. Oh, my goodness. My coaching business, it started as a mentoring platform. I was mentoring the 30-minute mentor, right? As I grew and as I learned things about what I wanted to do, and my mission was crystal clear, I realized that executive coaches, especially the credentialed ones, the ones that look like me, were freaking like, you don't find us. Like, we're hard to find. And most of us don't even know we exist.
Yeah.
So I was like, well, if access is really what I'm talking about here, I need to be that accessible coach for those people in the middle who want to go up, but would never, ever, ever be offered the services of somebody like me. So yeah, you know what the outcome needs to be, but you can try and you can fail and you can try and fail and try and fail, or you can find something successful and use what you learn there and make it even better. So
Ab-
there's no problem with that. And I think a lot of the sisters that are out there and wanting to build businesses or build brands get frustrated because the first thing they did out of the gate didn't work. So they thought. Two people came to my event. Well, you know what? Next year it'll be three.
Right.
And the next year it'll be four. You got to hang in there and be consistent so that people know that what you're trying to do anyway.
Yeah. And so before I get into the last two questions that I want to ask, there's something I've been seeing on social media, LinkedIn in particular, and based on your expertise, based on, your background, I want to ask you, when you see or hear quiet quitting, what comes to mind for you?
Black people have been doing that all our lives. It's not new. And here's the other thing that I think of. We live in a quick sound bite. That's what we used to call it when we were at TV. Now that it's social media, it's these tweetable,
Yeah.
phrases.
Come on.
Everything has to be packaged very nicely and called something. Kind of like in dating, we've got all these dating coaches, and now, there are there's psychology out there that does back a lot of this stuff, but it's been out there forever. Let's talk about ghosting. Like, I have a great aunt who was ghosted back in the early 1900s. They didn't call it ghosting. The man just left. He went for some milk or something, never came back.
Never came
They
back.
didn't call it ghosting, but it's been around. This is the same kind of stuff, this internet colloquialism that people just latch on to, and then that echo effect just keeps going and going and going. And eventually the term loses its power
Yeah.
because it doesn't even mean sometimes what it started out to mean, or
Hmm.
someone has co-opted it and changed the word for it anyway, or the meaning for it anyway. But yeah, quiet quitting, I really liken it to the whole dating scene because it's so obvious there. um Love bombing, you know um slow fade. You can name all of this different stuff and none of it is new.
Right.
It's just repackaged.
Yeah.
So yeah, quiet quitting. Black folks, women of color, the disadvantaged, the marginalized, we have been quiet quitting since the day we walked onto somebody's, I almost said plantation, but workplace. You know, we recognize that something's not going our way and we just kind of, we dial it down. We're still there, but we dial it down.
Yeah. And but the thing is, sometimes it's not noticed because our dial down is often somebody else's extraordinary.
Oh
You
yeah.
know, sometimes it's
Oh
not
yeah.
noticed.
Yeah, I had lunch with a former colleague the other day who happens to be a white woman, and she mentioned the quiet quitting, and I said, you know what? It's so funny. I'm just gonna say it. Black folks have been quiet quitting for years, and she kind of looked at me, and she was like, "Oh," and it's almost like, "Welcome to the world of what it feels like to be othered,"
Mm,
you know. And it isn't until the majority starts to feel it that we get terms like quiet quitting.
yeah. Yeah, absolutely. So for me, the way that I looked at it is the way I look at it, I think is different than how majority of people are seeing it. So for me, that's what I did. I made the decision that I was going to retire in January of 2021. And so I did the thing, still worked at the level that I worked at in my thing, but I said no to other stuff. I said no to things
Hmm.
that were not in alignment with my goals. Now I still
Hmm.
was, doing the work and putting it in, but I wasn't doing it in 50 different areas. Whereas before I would have been doing 50 different things. Instead, I'm like, nope, I'm going to dial down, pull back and focus on this thing and make sure that, it's in alignment with what
But
I
you know
want.
what, Deneen, I wouldn't even call that quiet quitting.
No, see,
I
that's what
think
I
that's
call,
what
that's what
more
it looks like
people
to
need to
me.
be doing.
All right.
More people need to
Exactly.
be doing it, especially women, because we are the yes people.
Mm,
We say yes to everything that comes our way because somebody said so. And we want to make sure that everybody thinks nicely of us. So we're not saying no to things that don't align with our goals. And you just had a crystal clear focus, and that's what you did.
I did.
Because at the end of the day, when you ask in this transactional relationship,
Mhm,
what are they paying me for?
mhm.
You can boil that down to your, job description and a few other things you might want to throw in there to let them know you're not asleep.
Right. Right.
So
So
yeah,
yeah.
you have the right. You have the ability. You can say no to things. And I think this is part of the okey doke. that we fall into, thinking that work is like a family, or
Mm,
we need to show our loyalty. All of these things, these big, warm, fuzzy words that have nothing to do with business, because they don't
absolutely.
count you as family when they start to, oh, we got to trim. Oh,
Right.
but she's family. We're going to keep her.
No, absolutely not. No, all of that. And and the thing too, I want to say this for those that are listening or watching, it's not even always that you're saying yes. We just take it upon ourselves, at least I did, to do all this extra. That's just, how some of us
It's
operate.
the old black tax.
So,
It's
yes,
the old black tax. We have
exactly
to do 10 times more, be 10
that.
times better, do 10 times, 10 times, 10 times. And we're wearing ourselves out.
Yeah,
And at some point, we just got to take that control back,
absolutely.
especially if you have proven yourself and
That
they
part,
know who you are.
that part.
And it's back to we give 150, we give 200%. Dial that back down to 80%. And you're
That
still going
part.
to be outdoing your colleague
Absolutely.
because you're excellent. But that's the catch. You better be excellent. We
That's right.
have to be,
Exactly.
you know.
Exactly. All
Mhm.
right. So let me pivot to the last two. So, in honor of my late sister, author and poet Soul True, she wrote a book, Dreams Deferred. And so, thinking about that, thinking about Dreams Deferred, please share a Dreams Deferred moment of yours.
Oh, wow. That's a good one. Yeah, and it's interesting because it really is a mindset on how you look at these things.
Mhm.
Sometimes wait isn't a bad thing.
Nope.
And in fact, the story I want to tell you has to do with the book. No thanks. Because I was still at the company and had been to the publisher, Harper Collins, twice. Amistad was interested in my book. Now, what's interesting is the book that they were interested in was kind of the beginnings of the book that actually got published.
Okay.
But at the time, it was a very different book. There were 12 strategies. It had a totally different name. Um, it made it down to the wire. And then they chose another book to go with over my own. And I wasn't really disappointed. I was actually very excited that my book even got that far. I had never pitched a
That's
book.
huge.
When
Mhm.
I went into that process, I didn't even have a proposal. I got the meetings after a couple emails. I'm on a plane. What I understood from my colleagues and friends that were writers and had published like 14 books, like Valerie Burton, she was like, this is unheard of. Like, nobody gets to go into the halls of Harper Collins and speak to the executive director, whatever, right? So I felt incredibly blessed just to be in the process. And when I came out of that process without a book deal, I actually came out with more contacts because the senior editor gave me 6 more names at other big houses
Um,
that were peers of his and said, drop my name. That's how much he believed in it. I had a proposal that I didn't even know how to do before I went in there. I had a solid proposal that just needed to be shopped around. I also had a marketing deck that I didn't have before, and I had the knowledge that I didn't have from just going through the process.
mhm.
So I was pretty excited. This would have been 2018. I was pretty excited. Now, where it got a little like it's great now my patience now was when I said, I went in without an agent.
Mm.
Why don't I get an agent? And a friend of mine, my book coach at the time, gave me several names. He said, I don't recommend one over the other. Try them all, talk to them, see what they think, share your proposal, that kind of thing. The first one on the list was enthusiastic. This woman was just like, oh my gosh, I love this. And by now, the book was taking on the shape that you see now. The only thing is that within the time that I started at HarperCollins and all the way to 2020, by the time I actually released it, think about it. I got off of a plane. I don't know. I stepped onto a plane the day after my last day at the big company.
Mm.
Did 40 speaking ops around the country. All sorts of people I met. I'm building my coaching business. I'm getting educated. I'm taking the courses. I'm getting the credits. Think about how much more knowledge I had and experience I had by the time it was time to actually publish that book. But the agent took her sweet time.
Mm.
it was almost a year that passed before she came back to me a third time after a third round of edits and gave me some insight from one of her writers who was a white man who didn't get it.
Okay.
Right. And
The
this is
person
a
that's
black
not your audience.
female.
Okay.
Right. This is a black female, and she was biting on what he had to say. And I understood. She understood what the publishing industry wanted to see.
Mm-hmm.
But in the midst of me going through this process, my book was pretty much written when Minda's book came out. And so by the time I sat down with this agent, I was like, y'all can't tell me this because look at Minda's book.
Right? That's
My
what I
book
was
should
thinking of.
have been out before hers, but hers is showing you that
Mm-hmm.
there's an audience for this. But they were like, no, no, no. Why don't you write your book on entrepreneurship? And I said, you know what? I don't think we need to work together, you
Right.
know?
Right.
And so I was thinking, I was like, what do I do? I went back to my book coach. I went to another friend that was trying to introduce me to another agent. And I said, you know what? I just need to do this myself.
Yeah.
And that's where the title actually came from.
Ah.
Originally, I had tested some of the content in just PDFs to my community just to see how it would go. And the first one said, no, thanks. I'll just include myself. That was the first one. And the woman, the agent, had said to me, well, why don't you just publish some ebooks and just see how that goes? And I'm saying to myself, that. And that's when it clicked. I was like, I have already done that. Let me go on and just publish this book.
Right.
And she's going to have to watch.
Mhm. Right.
She's going to have to watch. And so I went on and published the book. And I can just say that while that dream, I thought it was going to hit in 2018, book deal and all this kind of stuff. And I haven't ruled out, working with a publisher. It could still happen. If you talk to Valerie, she's done it with an agent, without an agent, with a publisher, without a publisher. She's done all of it.
Yeah.
It's not the traditional way, but I'm not traditional. So what, right? Whatever.
Exactly.
And I'm getting a little bit spoiled in getting most of my money when the royalties come. In those book deals, you get a nice chunk up front, but the pennies that come later, I mean, there are retailers still picking up my book right now.
That's all.
And I still get big chunks of money from Ingram Spark because Target somewhere has picked it up and run it.
Yeah.
Some bookstores order 25.
Yeah.
And you don't see that money. Right. You don't see that money if a publisher is like that go between.
Mm-hmm.
So anyway, I learned so much in that deferred time that, looking back, I chuckle because by the time the second edition came out and then we're winning awards, the agent who was still on my mailing list and she still follows me on social, we're still very much connected. She wrote me a note one day and she's like, you know what? You did that.
Yeah. Show and prove. That's what you did.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank
you showed and
I
proved.
appreciate that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Right.
And you know what? And that's what we've done in our careers, right? Oh, okay. Absolutely. Oh, okay.
Right.
So what do you think the one thing got you into those rooms? You mentioned being in the halls of Harper Collins and et cetera. How do you think you got there? Just one little quick thing that you think got you there.
Relationships based on excellence.
Yeah. Oh.
Because that in particular, I can draw a straight line to it. Okay. So if you read the acknowledgments, one of the first people I name is Michael Lehman. I did not know Michael Lehman before I started speaking on behalf of AT&T. I take that back. Yeah, that's right. Because I started speaking just as we launched the huge launch of Inspired Mobility. And we brought on Rev Run. Michael Lehman is Rev Run's manager in Run DMC. He read one of my articles in Black Enterprise. And it was based on one of my keynotes where I told the story of Rick Rubin and the story of Walk This Way. I was building an analogy around the fact that if you add culture to anything, it scales. So Walk This Way was a great example of that, where you took hip hop, which was, it was known in its circles, but it wasn't mass market yet. And you took this rock and roll group that was almost washed up, you brought them together. And by the way, very reluctantly, those two groups got together. And you end up with the #1 grossing album of all times for Run DMC.
Yeah.
Because now you say Run DMC and you don't just get, young nostalgic folks, right? You get old white men.
Yeah.
You get Asian people. I mean, Rev packed stadiums around the globe. Okay, all of that. So Michael read the story and he said, "You mentioned this was an excerpt from one of your keynotes?" I said, "Yeah." He said, "Where are you speaking next?"
Mm.
I said, "Well, I'll be at this ad agency in New York with brand innovators." He's like, "Well, my office is in New Jersey. I'll be right there." So he comes, and as it turns out, he knew the founder of Brand Innovators. He didn't know he knew him until he got there. They walked in together, smack right in front of each other. And they were like, "Oh my gosh, what are you doing here?" He beat me there. I get there, and the founder of Brand Innovators, Mark Sternberg, turns to me and said, "You didn't tell me who your special guest was going to be." I was like, Reverend's manager?" He was like, "Well, I didn't know him as that. We went to
Right.
college together."
That's awesome.
So they start bantering about, "Oh my gosh, the last time I saw you, you were outside of that club." He's like, "Oh yeah, I was out there. Bono was inside, and I still have that check to this day. It was Bono's first gig." This is how prolific this man is, right? So anyway, we go inside. I had some of my good girlfriends come with me. Giselle Phelps, who's now running a talent agency on the West Coast. Eva Green Wilson, who's the founder of the Sokomon Summit. The woman's been on, she's been on Oprah, she's been everywhere, right? But these are just my girlfriends. I didn't bring them because of that. But Eva was sitting on this side of me and Michael was sitting on this side of me. And I got up and I did what I do. And he ran out in the middle of the session. And I'm just thinking, this is an important Hollywood, such and so. He has business. I'm not even thinking about that. He comes back in. He's like, "I'm so sorry. I had to dart out. Rev wanted to talk and I needed to." And I said, "You don't have to explain any of that." He said, "No, but what I want to tell you is Rev told me whatever Michelle needs, do it for her."
Awesome.
And I was like,
He did?
and he said, "Yeah, I want to manage you." And I was like, "Manage me?" And I said, "That's right." And I'm thinking in Hollywood speak, that just means you're great, right? I'm trying to dumb it down.
Right.
I turned to Eva and I was like, because he's an entertainment attorney. He's worked with the likes of Jodeci, Grace Jones. I mean, but it's all entertainment. And I'm sitting here going, I'm corporate. What's this man talking about? So I turned to Eva and I said, she said, "Well, did you probe? Did you ask more questions?" I said, "No, I don't know how it works. I know I can't afford him." She's like, that works. She was getting her entertainment law degree from Howard at the very moment.
Okay.
So she knew. And she's like, "No, no, no, go back and talk to him." And while I'm talking to Eva, he's over talking to Mark and saying, "You said you wanted her back. Where do you need her?" He started brokering a deal right then.
Okay.
He's like, he wants you in Austin for South by Southwest to come speak at South by Southwest, but he's got to pay you. He's got to make sure that you've got ground transportation, all this stuff. And I'm like, this man is like working this thing.
Yeah, doing it.
So I was like, "I'm going to be in Phoenix for like my job." They said, "Well, when is that over?" I said, "Well, the conference is actually over on Saturday." "Okay, we'll get you on a flight Saturday night. You'll be in Austin on Sunday." I'm like, okay, this man was serious.
Yeah.
But at some point, I had to sit him down because I realized this was about the first time, around the time that I started getting kind of hateration from people because they saw the star was shining, but I was preaching the gospel of that company. I wasn't preaching my gospel. I was preaching the gospel of that company. So it's very disconcerting when people are like, "Oh, she's self-promoting." I'm like,
Yep.
I'm taking extra time away from my baby girl to do this for y'all, and this is what you're gonna, okay, whatever. So anyway, I told him, I said, "You know what? You have the potential to put me on a TED stage." He's like, "Yeah, I could do that." He's like, "When do you want to do it?" I was like, whoa, slow your roll. I said, "I need to think through this before I unleash you."
Yeah.
And so ultimately, I ended up telling him, instead of the speaking piece, I wanted to start writing books. I said, "So if you could quietly get me in front of the right people, if you know agents, if you know publishers, whatever you can do." That's how I got that meeting in Harper Collins.
That's awesome. And I have to
He
tell
went
you
to college with.
what I was going to say is when you first mentioned his name, I'm thinking because there is someone from that big company that we used to work at with that name. And I'm like,
Oh, really?
listen, because what did he have to do with this? So
No, and I was warned. I had someone who was in the business during that time, who had written a book and tried to cross all the T's and dot all the I's, and he was trying to go out and speak to. And I know the company has changed a lot from back when this was going on, but just because that man asked permission, they made his life hell.
Wow.
And not only did his book not get out when it was supposed to, because it was getting poured over by legal and compliance and all of these things, and it was gutted. His marriage was in shambles.
Wow.
Because they would like show up at his house unexpectedly, asking questions. And these were the things that I wanted to know. I was like, does it make sense for me to publish a book while I'm still here? I'm like, I don't even know of an officer that has pulled this off.
Yeah.
So does it make sense for me?
And after reading the book, no. You did wait, right?
See? No. Okay.
No, ma'am.
Right.
No, absolutely not.
So fast forward to that chapter in my book where I talk about being in the office of the officer and him saying, are you going to leave? This was part of the conversation. I said, I would love to stay, but I need to be able to continue to do what I'm doing. I said, but I think I need to answer that question for you, because as much as you and some of the other officers were like, we will stand in the gap for you, I don't think you deserve those bullets, and I definitely don't deserve those bullets. I haven't written a book yet, and you see how messy it's gotten.
Right.
So that was part of my reason for leaving, because I had those 6 items on my list that I said that I wanted to do in grad school. One of them was write books. And I knew that I could not do that and still be at that company.
Absolutely. No, it's a roadblock, if you will, because that's even what I said. I'm like, I'm just counting down to be able to remove this so that I can, be who I really want to be, right? Without those hindrances and whatnot. Because you have to think about, well, should I say this? Should I this? Should I that? And why should we be?
And who's going to be in my Kool-Aid making my life miserable?
Right? That part.
You don't want that. I mean, here I was doing my job and still being miserable.
Right. Exactly. All right. So last question. So I already kind of mentioned this, but so 2022 has been a year of living a dream lifestyle for me. And, you define it yourself, what that means. So what does it mean to you, and how are you living a dream lifestyle?
Well, I mentioned that list that I made back in grad school. I made a list of things that I wanted to do that I didn't believe I had the credibility, the credentials, the connections, all of those things to be able to pull off. But I think that the point of it is that you have to allow yourself to dream in the first place.
Absolutely.
And to be honest, I had forgotten what it was to dream. I had this dream in grad school, and had it not been for that surplus notice that came my way, and again, like I say, sit in the brokenness, sit in the mess, find the message in the mess. I gave myself that opportunity to really look around and see what my options were based on the seeds that I'd planted and the opportunities that were chasing me. And when you get to the point where you're not chasing stuff down and things are coming to you based on your excellence and the buzz that is made for you, for people who actually come into contact with you and are wowed by what you do, and their superstar clients say, do anything she wants. Yeah, that's what I'm talking about. And many of us won't get there because we are afraid to jump out there and be as excellent as we can be. But all that to be said, you have to first allow yourself to dream. And if I hadn't come into this situation, I don't know that I would be at that point where I would even have the opportunity to reflect on what it is that I actually wanted to do. And after several meetings with that officer and midnight calls after hours from other officers who pretty much were saying, we want you to stay, I had to evaluate, can I still knock off the last 2 things in this list and be here? Can I do that? And if I take this other gig over here, could I do it all? They're saying I can, but is that really real? Right. But yes, first you need to allow yourself to dream. And part of that dreaming is being intentional and actually recording what it is you're dreaming about, because we will all forget, and you got to be able to go back and have that reminder. So I knocked out that list in 2020, got them all done. And my coach says to me, so where's the next list? Right. That's exactly what Valerie Burton said to me. What's on the next list? So I started another list in 2020. I'm about halfway through it.
Okay.
But you've got to allow yourself to dream. What's next?
Absolutely. And
After
you
we've
know,
checked all those boxes, so many of us are like, I've arrived.
yeah,
Where? You're
right.
still alive.
And yeah, and kind of like with me, they're like, okay, retire. What does that look like? You have so much life. No, absolutely not. Here's the next part of the journey. But sometimes, you know what, we have to step away
Oh, yeah.
from the situation, right? It released us to live a dream lifestyle. That's what that did for us. So
yeah, and it's interesting when people come back to me, who either worked with me during that time and they're like, oh my gosh, it's like you weren't supposed to stay there. I was like, no,
no,
sometimes
absolutely.
you got to understand how God is moving, and that's deeply personal.
Yes.
I didn't have to explain it to you.
Correct.
And I didn't. Like my last day, you know how most people send out the big email, it's been wonderful and all that kind of stuff. I probably emailed my closest people to me and I quietly walked away.
Mm.
And the next thing I know, people are all over social going, oh my gosh, you're speaking where? You're doing what? With who? And then it was, you know what, you really were who we thought you were, only you're more. And I was like, well, I couldn't be all that where I was. And I had to realize that.
Boxes. We were in
Yeah.
boxes.
And I can help more people this way than I ever could.
Yes, correct. And you can do it your way, on your terms, when you choose to.
Yeah.
So what would you like to leave the audience with?
You know what? Take the baby steps. You don't have to be in a rush for anything.
Yes.
And many people think, maybe even if they just dropped in on my LinkedIn, that something happened for me overnight. In fact, the same Fortune editor had been stalking my LinkedIn, and she saw the time frame between AT&T and now. And she's like, that hasn't been long. I said, no, it's been 4 years. And, we're going into year 5. That's not a long time. Right. But that's just looking at those 2 little time frames. This story started when I was in college. It probably started even before that. It started way before that. There were building blocks that took time that even I didn't know were preparing me for this very moment in my life. So understand, like they say, Rome was not built in a day. Right. And if you're ready to do something you're inspired to do, take the time that it takes.
Yes.
This next book has been delayed a couple times because of personal stuff, family stuff. I've got aging parents. I've got a little girl that went through bullying last year. I had to stop and homeschool her for 9 months. I was still working. And I'm a mom in chief. I was doing that by myself. Yeah. My mom's a retired school teacher, so she pitched in from time to time, but you get Gen Z together with boomers and it's just explosive. So that couldn't work. It's just what I could work. Right. Talk about a time where I was just pulling my hair out. And I had to tell myself, you deserve a break. You do not have to get this book out. And when I do that, I actually do exactly what I encourage my clients to do. Look back and look at your accomplishments. And as it turned out, I had already published 1 book that year. Why did I need to do 2? Right? Yeah. The journal had come out. I'd launched the course. I had done all of this stuff. And the Lord just said, breathe. Lean into your family. They need you. And I'll take care of you. And he does. I don't have to worry about that. It's always going to be somebody you to come speak and do blah, 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 or somebody's going to call and say, I need your coaching. Like, how much? Right? These are the things I don't worry about when I know that I'm on mission. And my 3 values that are core to my intrinsic motivation are faith, family, and freedom. If it doesn't align with that, peace. Right. If it does align with it, I'm leaning in. Yeah. So I know that if I'm on that God-given purpose, he's going to take care of me. So I don't worry about these things. But yeah, take your time, sis. So I appreciate your time and the nuggets that you've dropped. So some of the key takeaways, of course, know yourself, your value, and be your own advocate. I love what you added to the relationships, because I'm huge on relationship building. I just think that's like one of the core key things that you need to have. I tell my son it's about who knows me,
more so than
Hmm.
who I know, but it all, ties in together. But I love how you added relationships built or based on excellence, because that
Yeah.
there is a key part, right? That a lot of people,
Yeah.
lean into.
I'm an ambivert. So as much as, I'm on here talking to you and I'm very animated and I get on the stage and I'm animated, I'm even a singer. I'm a professional singer. I can get on stage and leave it all on the stage and leave, but you best believe I'm going to be by myself somewhere to get those batteries recharged. I
Yes,
don't like classic networking. I am not working a room. You
right.
just can't make me do it. But what I've learned over time is if the people have an experience with me that is work related or whatever related to whatever I'm trying to do, and they were wowed by it,
Hmm.
those people talk and they also return.
Yeah.
So I've always made it my point to over deliver
Yeah.
and then going about my business. And these people always show up again, or people that you don't even know who are watching.
Hmm. Oh, there people are always watching, definitely always. And then the other thing that was key is that take your time.
Yeah.
Take your time. You don't have to rush to do things. Like, you control the time. If you give yourself a deadline and you're not, meeting it, that's fine. Change it. You can
Yeah.
do that. It's yours.
And lean into what's important. I mean, once you've outlined your priorities in your life, lean into those things
Yeah,
and it's going to work out anyway.
absolutely.
And
So,
he's going
El
to add
Michelle
to your
Smith.
story.
So again, El Michelle Smith, thank you so much for your time. So ways to, your full biography, ways to connect with you will be shared when the episode drops. But I thank you so much for today. I appreciated catching up with you, and enjoy the rest of the day. And so for those who
Thanks
are,
for having me on, Denise.
you're welcome. And so for those who
And
are
you let me know whatever you need. I'm here to support.
I will. So for those who are watching or listening, make sure you subscribe to YouTube or your favorite podcast platform, and we'll see you on the other side. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye,
Thank you.
everybody.